The modern world is apparently in a total crisis. Mental health issues have been on the rise forever. Research is showing a worldwide loneliness epidemic. Many Western countries will soon become retirement homes. There's burnout, identity diffusion, doom scrolling, and modern dating. There's climate change, that's still a thing, and metaphysics. Is your head spinning yet? Good, because I want us to flip this outlook on its head and try out a different perspective. Just for this video, what if most of these problems aren't crises in and of themselves, but the expressions of man's struggle with the problem of how they should live? The crisis being a symptom of the underlying issue of struggling to tackle the problems of living. Which, okay, sure, I hear you say, but hasn't this existential issue always bothered mankind? Or is there something about modernity which makes us uniquely prone to struggling to struggle? No. And we would know that if we hadn't become symbolically illiterate. I'll try to explain. And so you could put something on your resume. By the end of this video, I promise you'll understand why this is psychologically much more than a symbol and why, sadly, it remains as relevant as ever. So normal literacy, the ability to read, and thus science, has been widespread in the West for only about 400 years. Obviously, this advance in our cognitive abilities has done wonders for our adaptation in the world. On average, we live incredibly healthier, longer, and more comfortable lives. Turns out we're really good scientists. But for a much longer period, like 200,000 years, we also managed to adapt to the environment, and quite well at that, without the formal enterprise of science. We did that by using another older system of the psyche, the meaning system. So, metaphorically speaking, humans seem to engage with reality by using two basic approaches. One approach is run by sensory information and deals with facts, or what is. The temperature of the water in this cup is 100 degrees Celsius. It's an objective fact that in itself has no implications for us. It's just how things are. This uniquely human ability to understand how things are is what we call objective empirical science. For simplicity, we can call it the information system. But another equally important approach deals with value, which isn't actually inherent in facts. That's because the value of the 100-degree cup of water changes on whether you want to make a cup of coffee or refresh yourself during a hot day. The implication for meaning of the same fact depends on the subject and the goal. For making coffee, and if I like coffee, it's perfect. For cooling down, or if I hate coffee, it's evil. So value is the domain of what ought to be, or simply put, how to act. This is what I call the meaning system, our moral compass. Symbols stem from the system by understanding reality not through objective facts, but through subjective experience. That's why a list of facts isn't a story. The subjective implication for behavior is missing. For example, objectively speaking, you should run away from a dragon, but that wouldn't make for a good story or a remarkable character. For many reasons, it is much more valuable to fight it. Thus, the meaning system provides patterns for meaningful, valuable behavior. We call it a compass because it allows us to orient ourselves in an infinitely complex world made up of ambivalent facts. Alright, so now that we got that, what's valuable to understand is that our meaning systems are always running alongside our information systems. For example, when you enter a new room, you're obviously scanning it for sensory information, the size, the decoration, etc., right? Well, not entirely. More importantly, you're first scanning it for motivational significance. Are there signs of danger? Reward? What's the social situation and where do I rank in it, and who do I talk with depending on my goal? As you can see, the meaning system is much more pressing to our adaptation than the sensory system. Two people could scan the same exact factual room but come out with two completely different conclusions. For the one person, it might be a room full of friends in which to relax in, but for the other, it might be a room full of bullies from which to get out of. Now, that's a lot of information to process for a single room. So to better adapt, what humans seem to have are meaning frameworks, or theories about the environment which are largely culturally determined and then modified with experience. Basically what I mean is we seem to understand reality through a pre-existing set of categories or abstractions to help deal with motivational phenomena. Symbols. The world is first and foremost symbolic to us. When I call someone a snake, you immediately understand that I don't mean that literally, but that the person is untrustworthy. That is possible because via language, culture, we share a meaning framework, which through collective experience assigned the symbol of the snake to mean dangerous phenomena. Obviously, we do this for better adaptation, because anytime you encounter something resembling the abstraction of a snake, you don't have to think and can immediately react to it by withdrawing, thus possibly escaping a deadly bite. Also, the snake can trick you by, say, changing its color, because you're reacting to the category and not a specific fact. If that wasn't enough, you can also adapt the category itself for multiple purposes. So that's why you react in the same way to a literal snake and a person who's acting like a snake. It's adaptively highly efficient. Anyway, by spinning these motivational symbols into a narrative, that's mythology or a movie, we can communicate this essential information for behavior without any problems whatsoever about the objective reality that your coworker isn't a literal snake. Our ancestors thrived for such a long time without formal science precisely through mastery of this symbolic language. They didn't have to understand the facts of the world to navigate through it. The motivational significance for behavior was more than enough. So much so that we still rely on these systems even to this day. So, in this light, we can imply that the endless crises of our age seem to stem from the disorientation of the meaning system. Now, speaking metaphorically, since the fact-value systems seem to be distinct from one another, although obviously intertwined, it could be the case that with the expansion of the cognitive fact system, it started to conflict with the older value system. What I mean is, we now know that the brain is organized hierarchically, and that the new rational system, the neocortex, seems to have top-down executive control over the rest of the brain. This could imply that our newfound powerful rational neocortex is messing with the older meaning systems, which are inherently more related to the emotional regions of the brain, because motivation and emotion are inherently linked. So, for example, our rationality can interpret and reinterpret to death the significance of an occurrence, also known as overthinking. Rationality as a phenomenon does seem to be inherently reductive and discriminating. I mean, science literally is based on experimentation, in which a natural connection is broken and analyzed in isolation. That's exactly the opposite of what the value system does, which is it abstracts and confounds various phenomena into large categories of symbols, as with the snake. So all of this to say, it could be that the price of our newfound exponential knowledge is a complete disorientation of our older primordial adaptive systems. But that's the evolutionary side of the problem. However, we can flip the problem on its head again and come at it from a cultural perspective, which is, in my eyes, pouring gasoline on the fire. You see, throughout history, the problem of how to act was solved by handing down tradition. An individual inherited their meaning framework and for the most part shared it completely with the rest of the village or tribe. Young people were tightly held and guided through life by shared narratives, rituals, initiations, and customs. Things which have become increasingly difficult to hold in a post-urbanized world of megacities. So much so that our valuing itself shifted to hold tradition as tyrannical, at least in the liberal world. The modern person wants to pick and choose and figure it out for themselves, which sounds swell, but how many of us are capable of doing so in practice? Look, we're goal-orientated and hyper-social creatures. As I've argued, we rely on shared social structures to have meaning in our lives. When these value systems erode, we don't just throw up our hands and go fishing. No, whenever anarchy manifests, it creates a power vacuum. So when time-tested traditions fail, in come the gurus and the charlatans. Paradoxically, in our times of liberal democracy, instead of unlimited freedom, we seem extremely susceptible to the tyranny influence of these false idols, which compete with one another and thus promote fragmentation because they're trying to become the idol, or at least the idol with the most influence. That's because trying to construct your own original value system, which integrates not only your endless desires, but the endless requirements of others into a coherent unity that can stand the test of time, disease, and death, is a great way of falling into a pit of anxiety and despair. Admirable, but profoundly naive. That's why these false idols compete over that pit, so they could be the ones catching you with their net that can relieve this existential tension. for a price. And I think this symbol is the most prominent manifestation of such a net that also carries the ultimate price. I mean, it's fascinating how we're basically experiencing in real life the wars and tricks between the competing gods depicted in the mythology of ancient Greece. We're not as far off from the ancients as we'd like to imagine we are, and our struggles, at least on the meta level, aren't that different. Okay, this does seem like a pretty grim picture. However, I do have what you clicked for, which is a really weird proposition on what might help. We need to read up on mythology. No, wait, seriously. Now, simply reading up on mythology might seem like a strange way to spend your time. But as I've been arguing my way here, it seems to me we're responsible as moderns to train our meaning systems just as much as we're training our rational knowledge if we want to find balance again. I truly think a lot of the crises I mentioned at the start of the video fundamentally rise from a disbalance of these two approaches. I doubt that if, symbolically speaking, we figured out how to undermine our meaning framework, that the solution is coming up with another framework. Shouldn't we instead seek to learn to understand these frameworks themselves so that in times of crisis we could operate on their meta level? Just like understanding the heart as such allows us to become heart surgeons and save lives, we need to understand human values as such too and save cultures. Now, that might seem like an impossible task, but so did operating on the heart. And look where that got us. Look, I understand this all sounds like philosophical blabbering, but I do have a very concrete suggestion to try out. It's this book, and don't worry, I won't try to sell you it. So this book belongs to a unique broad line of study which inherently tries to solve the exact problems we outline, but on the meta level. It seeks to understand meaning. I'm of course referring to psychological comparative mythology. That's why I want to recommend this book by Erich Neumann as the best entry point to it. Without spoiling it, Neumann demonstrates through comparative mythology how human narratives have the same fundamental structure across time, from today right down to the most ancient and primitive people. He shows how by studying these gods and goddesses, we can actually find a reflection of our own psychic structure. In the same way one studies atoms to understand the objective makeup of reality, why not study these subjective narratives of history to understand the subjective makeup of our psyche? Instead of giving you just another framework of meaning, it instead tries to give you a toolbox for understanding frameworks themselves. This is precisely the ability, symbolic literacy, that is so lacking in our times of failing traditions, endless facts, and dizzying freedom. This book is like a cognitive trade school. Now, obviously, one book isn't going to solve the world. That's something false idols promise. But it's a start, and you can follow Neumann up with Joseph Campbell, Mircea Eliade, Carl Jung, and at that point, you'll know where to proceed next. What all these thinkers share is a unique rational attempt at truly re-understanding meaning and value without reducing it to a hollow empirical formula, which serves as ice-cold water to our dehydrated, overeducated, and hyper-rational souls. Okay, I'll stop before I become a guru myself. See you next time.